I transmigrated as the mad fool, but now I build the Cold Regent's heart. Chapter 3. The Lin estate courtyard was a whirl of frantic last-minute preparations. Servants, dressed in newly pressed uniforms, rushed to lay out ornamental screens and place expensive scented censers that only masked the underlying smell of anxiety. I walked through the chaos, the centrifugal table fan tucked securely under my arm. It was still silently spinning, providing a small, private breeze. I spotted Su Jin immediately. He was draped over the matriarch's shoulder, dramatically dabbing his eyes with a silk handkerchief, whispering fabricated tales of my madness and dangerous, dirty habits. The matriarch, a woman of heavy makeup and heavier jewelry, spotted me, her face contorted into a mask of pure fury.
Lin Xu!
You, Lin Xu, get back to the shed. You smell of the stables. I didn't break stride. I am here on a matter of utility, matriarch. I will be gone as soon as the transaction is complete.
I am here on a matter of utility, matriarch. I will be gone as soon as the transaction is complete.
Before she could launch her diatribe, the herald's call cut through the noise. Prince Jing arrives! A massive, intimidating black carriage rolled into the courtyard. It was not ornate or gilded. It was a pure machine built for speed and defense. The iron wheels were heavy, the leather was thick, and the crest, a black iron hawk, was formidable. The carriage stopped with a jolt. Then disaster struck. As the prince's head guard, a large man with a stern face, pulled down the heavy step to assist the prince, one of the massive rear wheels twisted violently and snapped off its axle. The entire carriage groaned and pitched hard to the side, throwing the head guard off balance and smashing the heavy wooden wheel against the cobblestones. The prince was trapped inside. Panic erupted. The matriarch shrieked. Su Jin forgot his elegant pose and simply stared, jaw slack. A broken imperial carriage was a massive offense, a potential charge of treason, and an insult to the Cold Regent. The head guard frantically tried to lift the axle by hand. He failed. The metal was too heavy, the angle too awkward. "Move, you fools! Lift, now!" The matriarch's sons rushed forward, grunting as they tried to shoulder the massive weight. It didn't budge. The structure was resisting their chaotic, uncoordinated effort. I walked directly toward the wreckage. "Inefficient," I said, loud enough for the struggling men to hear. "You are applying brute force, but the center of gravity is too low, and the fulcrum is non-existent." The struggling men stopped, glaring at me. The head guard turned, his face dark with rage. "This is not your time for madness, Lin Xu. Get out of the way before I take a switch to you." I ignored him. My eyes were already analyzing the scene. The wheel had snapped due to a failure in the shear strength of the axle pin. The brake was clean, but the axle now rested against a low ridge in the cobblestones. "You need to lift it just enough to slide a support block underneath, but the axle has no purchase for a lever," I stated, walking around the wreckage. I placed my copper-bladed fan down on a stone bench. It continued to spin quietly. "I need 2 lengths of rope and a sturdy crossbeam," I commanded, my voice cutting through the panic with the sharp authority of a commanding officer. "Quickly, now, before the joint seizes further." My tone brooked no argument. A frightened footman, sensing I was the only person offering a solution, bolted toward the stables. A moment later, the prince's door opened from the inside. Prince Jing stepped out. He was exactly as cold and imposing as the stories claimed. Clad in heavy, dark, formal robes, his face was carved from granite. His eyes were the color of cold obsidian, and they immediately locked onto me, the unwashed, authoritative figure, instead of the frantic matriarch. He wore the infamous limp, and his posture suggested immense control over a body that had betrayed him. He looked like an incredibly complex, damaged machine. "What is your plan?" the prince asked, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "To use the principles of leverage and block and tackle to lift the axle with minimal effort, Your Highness," I answered, meeting his gaze directly. "The men are wasting energy fighting the weight, not cooperating with the physics." The footman returned, breathlessly dropping 2 thick ropes and a wooden beam. "You," I pointed to the head guard, whose name I suddenly recalled was General Wee, "get a thick piece of flat stone or a short wedge. It must be strong enough to bear pressure." General Wee hesitated, then glanced at the prince. The prince simply gave an infinitesimal nod. General Wee found the stone. I took the crossbeam and slid it far under the carriage's body, near the intact front axle, using the beam as a Class 1 lever. I tied one rope end to the very tip of the lever. "Now, General, you, the matriarch's sons, and 2 footmen, 5 men, not lifting the carriage, but pulling the rope downwards." I directed them to pull in a rhythm, coordinating their effort. They were still skeptical, but the prince was watching. As they pulled down on the rope, the lever's action lifted the heavy carriage body by the front end, simultaneously raising the damaged rear axle off the ground. It required effort, but the weight was distributed and multiplied. The 5 men who couldn't lift the carriage by hand were now controlling the movement. "Now," I barked, "slide the stone block under the axle housing, quickly." General Wee scrambled to slide the stone wedge into place beneath the exposed axle. The carriage was resting on the block, safely stabilized. "Release," I commanded. The men released the rope. The carriage settled on the stone block, stable and immobilized, no longer an immediate disaster. The entire process from my command to stabilization had taken less than 90 seconds. The courtyard was silent. Prince Jing took a slow step forward, his gaze fixed not on the stabilized carriage, but on the dirty, confident man standing before him. "You are Lin Xu," the prince stated, the name tasting like cold metal on his tongue. "I am, Your Highness, and your carriage is fixed," I replied, wiping the grease on my tunic, a tunic I suddenly hated for its tackiness. "Fixed," the prince scoffed, gesturing to the missing wheel. "It is resting on a rock." "It is stabilized and awaiting repair," I corrected him calmly. "The structural integrity is restored. More importantly, the reason it broke was a failure in the axle pin's metallurgy. It was brittle, poor quality, and failed under vertical stress. The fault lies with the Ministry of Works for sourcing cheap materials, not with the driver. I didn't just fix the immediate problem, I diagnosed the systemic flaw. It was an imperial problem, and I had handed the prince a technical report. The prince looked at me, the actual mad fool who had just saved the imperial carriage from further damage, diagnosed a flaw in the Ministry of Works, and lectured the head guard on physics. His gaze flickered toward the stone bench where my fan was quietly spinning. Then he looked down at his own leg brace, which felt suddenly heavier, clumsier, and far more inefficient than it had a minute ago. "General Wee," the prince commanded, his voice sharp, "bring the orthosis designer to my study immediately. The competition can wait." He turned and limped into the matriarch's shocked manner, leaving me with General Wee, who now looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. I picked up my fan. It was time for the private consultation.